Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Yeah, fresh off of the 5-part carburetor rebuild series for the starting engines. And I know that got a little bit deep on the details, but like I said before, the primary goal of this whole rebuild has been to leave that detailed log of everything that needed to be done to get a Caterpillar D2 back into operable form. So with that being said, another comment that's come up quite a bit under the last couple of videos is wondering if that is the carburetor for 1113, and no, it's not. Remember I said those 5 episodes have lived on my computer for about 2 years. When Senior rebuilt that carb, that was for one of the Antique Caterpillar Machinery Owner Club Chapter 3 machines, and Senior basically donated his time and some parts and stuff to get one of their carburetors fixed up for one of their D4 starting engines. That's why that one got paint and everything. And in the 5 days that it took to get those episodes uploaded, I did a lot of work off camera. I got a lot of the miscellaneous plumbing stuff rounded up, rehabbed, and ready for the top of that starting engine, as well as rebuilt 1113's original carburetor in that time. And here it is right here. You'll remember this tractor had something that landed on it at one point and dented some things on top of the engine, wreaked some havoc with some of the control levers, and it also had damaged the throttle body of the original carburetor. It broke it right off at the base. So I did have to replace the entire throttle body, but the float bowl portion is original to 1113. It has the early first generation vented bowl, and it actually has a super early like bronze housing vent on the side, which usually that's aluminum. So, and I did all the same steps. We drilled out all the necessary plugs and made sure all the passages were open, put plugs in them, threaded plugs I should say, so the carburetor can join the lineup of other pieces ready to go on top of the starting engine. So Senior's still working on the magneto. That's going to be another rather in-depth segment, but the final major component for the top of that starting engine is the belt-driven governor. So let's get into that. So it's a pretty simple design. It's driven by a belt off of the flywheel. There are a set of flyweights in the pulley that act upon a rod that goes through the body that is hooked to this arm. This arm is hooked to the spring. The spring has the tension adjusted by this screw with the lock nuts right there. So the flyweights are always trying to close the throttle down, and the spring is always trying to open the throttle up. By setting the tension of the spring in just the right place, you get the high-speed operation of the starting engine. So fairly simple. First thing I need to do is get the spring off of that arm. And we'll pull that adjustment screw out at the same time. Next, we loosen this screw on the arm so that we can take the arm off of the shaft. And there's also a really tiny little woodruff key that locates the arm to that shaft. Gotta dig that out of there. And then the 4 screws come out of this cover at the back. The cover should come off. There we are. A little bit rusty in there. Not too horrible though. Next, now this slotted cap comes off the bearing on the end of the shaft. Sometimes you have to tap it a little bit. Get it loosened up. There we are. And a tiny little ball bearing beneath that. So we need to get that off the shaft as well. That's just kind of a light press fit. So before I try to tap that shaft out of the bearing, I like to remove the end cap from the pulley. There's the flyweights right there on pins. Those pins just float, so that can just all be pulled right apart at this point. But I like getting those flyweights out of there so that the end of the shaft doesn't interfere with them at all when I'm trying to drive it out of the bearing on the back side. Okay, there's the tiny little ball bearing. And there's the shaft. You want to be careful not to bend it, because if you bend it at all, then it's going to bind on the bushing that's on this end and the bushing that's on the front end as well. So, and then the governor's not going to work. So really have to take care of that shaft. Transitioning to the vise now, I need to remove this spanner nut at the top. And you'll see I threaded a couple of fine thread 1/4 inch bolts into the pulley hub, and then that's what I viced up to. So we'll have a good purchase on that. The first thing I need to do is bend down this little lock tab that is right here. You can see it has a fold over lock beneath it that has a series of tabs all the way around, so you just tighten it in, and whichever one is closest to one of those slots, that's the one you bend up. So in typical cat style, yeah, we've got a spanner nut back here, and it's completely captured in that housing. You can't get at it from the sides with anything. So I made a tool right here. And once again, I just took an old nut off of an old governor because I've got parts, okay? And took some 3/16 square key stock, welded in there, welded an old, I think that was a made in Taiwan socket on the end of it. So once I fold that lock down, it'll engage with all those slots. Take it right out of there. There's the nut. And the lock. Transition to the press now. I need to push the pulley with the shaft out of the housing and out of both bearings. The way I do this, I use a bearing splitter to get just behind the pulley and grab underneath the edge of the housing. I'll use a socket to push on the end of the shaft because there's that little bushing in there that the shaft that goes through the center of the governor rides on. You don't want to burr that at all. It'll give you problems. So we just gently dial it up and push the pulley and shaft right on out. There it goes. So now we have the pulley with the shaft and the press. We have this front bearing, and the spacer are going to have to come off of that shaft. So just a smaller bearing splitter beneath that front bearing. Again, we're just pushing on the end of the shaft with a socket so we don't mar that little bushing. Got the spacer. You got to press that bearing the whole way though. Back to the housing now. We've got the rear bearing and a spacer behind that. We can just drive those out. Don't need the press. Bearing and spacer. Bearing, spacer. We've got the housing completely disassembled. The pulley and shaft is empty. Just, a couple minor things left to do. Drift these pins out and remove the flyweights just like that. And last thing I can do is remove this little arm from inside this end cap here. So that's just another machine screw. Loosen it, and then usually you can pry that. Yep, it comes right off. There's the arm. Another small, tiny little woodruff key. There's the key. Shaft comes out. And that's it. Fully disassembled. So it's time to clean and inspect. I'll bring you back. With everything cleaned and inspected now, it was really pretty good inside. I really didn't find much that I could say was wrong. So you want to pay special attention to the bushing in this front cover. That has to be in good condition, as well as the corresponding bushing in the back of that pulley shaft, and the bushings in this rear cap right here, where that pivot arm shaft goes down through. So all that stuff looked really, really good. And I'm gonna put some new bearings on the shaft. Now these are sealed bearings, and these that came out of it really don't seem bad, but I had a couple of the new old stock ones. That's the 3B2084. So these are, like I said, sealed up just like those. As long as I had them, might as well put new bearings on that shaft, otherwise everything else here is in good shape. So let's start putting these on. Front bearing's in place on the shaft as well as the spacer. Rear bearing is in the housing, so we can put the two together at this point. Back in the vise now, we can drop on the new fold-over lock, part number 3B2036 on that, and the nut, the tapered portion faces the bearing. And this lock tab right here aligns with an open slot, so we'll bend that up into it just like that. Now we can assemble the flyweights into the cap. So I'll just put a little bit of assembly grease on the pen and on the weights. Now before I put the shaft in, I'm going to put a little bit of oil in the bushing right there. And you want to make sure that little hole right there is open. That feeds oil into the back side of that bushing. So that's a critical passage to have working. So shaft has a decent coating of oil on it, so that goes in the bushing. And you can see how as the flyweights wing out, it lifts that shaft up. So that's the action of that part. I've got oil on the bushing in the main shaft now, and the gasket is in place. So we can install this into the housing. Notice I've kept two of the front cover screws loose. There's a reason for that. We'll come back to that in a bit. So next up is this tiny little ball bearing. Goes on the end of the shaft. And finally, the slotted cap. Alright, just finished a little bit of light assembly. Got that lever put back into the end cap with the shaft, and got the gasket ready to go on the end cap here, and a good bit of assembly grease in that notch. So of course the end of that lever is going to engage with the notch on the end of the cap. Now I've got that other tiny little woodruff key in place on that shaft, and I can put the arm on it. And finally, I've got the stud that the governor spring hooks onto, and I've loosened both of those jam nuts, greased it up. I don't know where we're going to have to set it when we get this all put back together, but there's a pin that goes down through the ear right here and engages with that slot in the stud, so it does not want to turn. And the old governor spring was looking a little bit worn. Luckily, got a new old stock version of that, so pop that in real quick. Like it. So we're put back together aside from those two screws that I still have loose on the front cover here. We will get to that after we get it on the starting engine. Time for the belt, but that's where the waters get a little bit muddy. So crosses over to this Dayco 17390. That's what fits the majority of these starting engines. But this being an early first generation build, I'll bring this other governor in, and I want to show you the difference here. Casting number on 1113's early governor housing is a 4B598. This is what they changed to at serial number 5J1460. It went to a 5B5105, and the difference is how deep these slots are for belt adjustment. You can see the early one doesn't have much for slots on it at all. So this is the first generation governor I've ever actually messed with on a Cat D2. So this is the belt that suits these 5B5105s. We'll just see if it's still going to work with this or if I'm going to need to get something longer, because I don't have quite the same amount of adjustability in this early one. So let's just see what we can make happen here. Belt on the flywheel, loop it onto governor pulley. All right, we're on the studs. I can tell you already it's tight already, and I'm not even, yeah, that's not gonna, you probably can't see it from your vantage point, but instead of the governor pulley being in line with the flywheel, it's like this. I mean, it's not even, yeah, I'm gonna have to get a different belt. So even that first generation number crossed to this one. So the first generation Cat number, I'm saying. So yeah, we're gonna have to go to the parts store and do some custom sizing here, but that's kind of a letdown. Oh well, it wouldn't be first generation cool if I went and changed out this whole governor housing, so we'll find something to make it work. But to give you all an idea of what governor install would be like, pretending we have a belt that actually fits, it goes on those two studs right there. It is slotted for belt tension, so you can move it just a little bit like that. And I like to throw a couple flat washers on top of it just to help the nut bridge that slot. We won't tighten those down yet either, because it's going to have to come back off when I get a different belt, but linkage is ready to attach to the carburetor right there. And the last thing we can do today is fill it with oil. That's why I left two of those screws loose. Now the book says to just take one out and add oil into the pulley through that until you can roll it around to the bottom and oil runs out of that hole. So because I push the oil in with this syringe, I take like another one out so the air has a place to go. It just makes it a lot easier. So I'll just run it up a little bit and start pushing it in. And we'll pull it back out, check from time to time. It doesn't take a whole lot. And yep, I can just see some oil just starting to run out. So that's all you need. Call that good. Got the last two front cover screws put in, and at least it spins well, right? We've got that going for us. But darn it, another small stumbling block with the starting engine here. And I'm certainly not getting rid of this belt because it fits every other D2 I've got on the place except for 1113. So that's all right. I'll head back to the parts store tomorrow, and I'm sure they love me there, because I'll be like, yeah, you know that really odd size belt that you've never sold to anybody and doesn't fit anything, that's the one I want. So I go in there on a lot of trips like that. So anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Yeah, we'll get the right belt sorted out for this. I'll get back with you all, let you know what that ended up being, and then we'll move on from there. Hope to see you again.